Take a network break, help yourself to a virtual donut, and join us for our weekly dash through today's tech news. We're going to talk about another HPE acquisition, Cisco's earnings and layoffs, the Social Security data breach, and more. I just want to let you know that registration is now open for AutoCon 2. This is taking place November 18th to the 22nd in Denver. AutoCon's an independent conference dedicated to advancing the state-of-the-art in network automation. It includes hands-on workshops and speakers sharing their learning and experiences. Early bird pricing is available until August 28th. If you're looking to get started with network automation or help drive automation products internally, AutoCon's the place to be. You can find out more at networkautomation.forum/AutoCon2. That's number 2, networkautomation.forum/AutoCon2. All right, let's dive into the news. News reports emerged that a hacking group may have stolen 2.9 billion Social Security numbers and dumped them for free to an online market for stolen data. The story emerged in part due to a class action lawsuit filed against a background checking company in Florida. The suit alleges that hackers stole the data from the background check company and that the company had acquired personal information of people in the database without permission. But then there's a story in the Washington Post citing researchers who say that some of the Social Security numbers are valid, but that the size of the dump might, quote, suggest fake or reused data, end quote.
And Drew, I'm sorry this just hit me, but there are 330 million people in the United States. So how do you get to 3 billion Social Security numbers, even if there are people that died? I mean, it doesn't add up. There's at least 2 billion extra noise in that mess. There's no such thing, as far as I know, as 2.9 billion Social Security numbers. I don't know.
That is an excellent point. And that may be why some researchers are saying, well, hold on, there could be fake or reused data or duplicated data in this. I think for our purposes, though, the big thing is that Social Security numbers are out there, whether it's through this breach or another breach. And what you should be thinking about is how to take steps to protect yourself, protect your family. So there's lots of advice floating around out there, including things like initiating credit check freezes with the big 3 credit reporting companies in the U.S. That's Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. And doing other things like maybe putting 2-factor authentication on sensitive websites that you use, like banking, or even paying for like credit monitoring services or services that monitor whether your information is showing up on the dark web.
Which is all great as a consumer. As an enterprise technologist, you should also be preparing for a new wave of attacks based on this data and this information. And oh, by the way, if you are using any component of Social Security numbers for authentication of your users or customers, stop that now.
Yes.
Understand that those have been hacked and use alternate mechanisms.
Yeah, it really irritates me that organizations use them for things outside of identifying you as essentially a citizen of the United States. It was a bad idea from the beginning.
Well, it's really making sure that you actually get the money that you've earned, because essentially what happens with Social Security is not even just for citizens. You can have a Social Security number if you're a green card holder, or even any other legitimate worker here in the U.S. It's basically to say, if you earn something, we are putting this in the fund for you to get it back. But yes, that has always made me mad. And actually, a number of years ago, I was actually shredding documents and realized that my bank in the 1990s had my bank account information in full with my name and Social Security number in full on the paper statements, which is why I was shredding.
Wow. Oh, boy. The other thing I'm curious about is to see how this class action suit proceeds against the data broker. Data brokers are holding sensitive information. I think they have an extreme duty of care. They often don't really do their duty in this. So I want to see how this lawsuit plays out. If they happen to get sued into oblivion, it wouldn't necessarily hurt my heart any.
And you are a very sensitive and empathetic person, Drew. But yeah, not towards data brokers, who get your stuff hacked. No.
Yeah. All right, moving on. HPE is buying a hybrid cloud management company called Morpheus Data. HPE says Morpheus will add to HPE GreenLake's ability to help customers deploy, operate, and manage hybrid cloud workloads and track hybrid cloud costs. According to HPE, customers will be able to, quote, seamlessly provision and manage almost any workload across traditional and modern cloud environments, including brownfield private and public infrastructure, end quote.
And this, I think, makes a lot of sense because Morpheus uses a whole slew, a portfolio of AI techniques, including machine learning, deep learning, Gen AI, statistical and algorithms, and others to help manage network traffic and traffic generally. This becomes incredibly important. It's one of the use cases that we've found AI in general tends to work for. And the fact that they're not wedded to any one form of AI is also very useful. So this is basically a good thing. And I think, Drew, you had a comment that this was a relationship that was long-standing and it's just kind of moved to the next stage.
Yeah, I guess HP and Morpheus have been partners since 2022, and Morpheus's cloud management platform has been an essential component of HP at GreenLake. So as Greg always used to like to say, HP is now just putting a ring on it.
Exactly.
I'll note that the Register also reports that Morpheus has deals with Dell and AWS, and HP says it will continue to honor those deals, and no word on how much HPE paid. John, is hybrid cloud a thing? It seems like, GreenLake is really all in on it, but what do you see from customers around hybrid cloud?
Absolutely. In fact, a couple of years ago when we were doing research on cloud, we got to the point where we stopped asking people if they were using cloud because 99% of people said yes, and that 1% was lying or clueless. And these were actually interviews. So we usually found out they would say no, and then we'd ask a few questions and discover that, in fact, they were.
Right.
What is changing is that people are now moving towards multi-cloud. I think those who have been listening to a lot of these episodes will see where this is coming from, but it's generally a good idea to have multiple clouds that you can transition to in case one cloud provider who shall remain nameless might go down. And in fact, all of them have experienced outages at some point. There's also the fact that certain clouds are potentially better, cloud infrastructure is better for certain workloads than others, on top of which anytime you have a private data center and a cloud, you are by definition hybrid, and that's actually incredibly important. We spend a lot of time on heavy strategy talking about how to decide which workloads live where in the cloud. So yes, I think going all in on multi-cloud is good, and hybrid cloud.
Yeah, and one of the other capabilities I guess Morpheus has is to track those hybrid cloud costs. And I think early on as hybrid and multi-cloud came to the fore, people were talking about sort of like cloud arbitrage, trying to sort of game out where you get the most bang for your buck. I don't know if that's still a thing, or it's just like, I've got workloads everywhere. I don't know how much it's costing me. Please, somebody help.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's much more the latter. And I think that's actually super important right now. Like answering the question, I don't know how much that's costing me, is incredibly important right now.
All right, moving on. Cisco has announced it will lay off 7% of its employees. That's about 5,900 people, according to the Associated Press. This comes on top of an announced layoff of 4,000 people in February of 2024. The news is coming out around the same time that Cisco announced bad Q4 and full year financial results. Although I will note that I feel like on Network Break, we do this story at least once a year. Cisco routinely has very large layoffs, so I think it's not easy to tie it to one specific, financial result or some other thing within the company. That's just what they do.
Yeah, along with just reorging every 10 minutes and setting up internal competition, because competition is good. Annual layoffs is just a Cisco thing. But nonetheless, as you always like to say, Drew, hugs to the folks that are getting affected because getting laid off sucks.
It does. Yeah, so our sympathies. And again, this probably doesn't say much about you and more about just how Cisco and a lot of these large tech companies operate. This is just what they do. All right, a quick reminder to tell you again about our sponsor, AutoCon 2. Registration is now open for AutoCon 2. It's taking place November 18th to the 22nd in Denver. And let me just highlight that. In Denver, not Las Vegas. If you are tired of Las Vegas, which many of us are, Denver is a really nice spot to go. AutoCon's an independent conference. It's dedicated to advancing the state-of-the-art in network automation. And you'll get things like hands-on workshops and speakers sharing their learning and their experience. Early bird pricing is available until August 28th. So if you're looking to get started with network automation or just want to talk to some peers to see what they're doing out in the world, it would be great. Ethan Banks and I will be at AutoCon shooting video, recording podcasts, and generally hanging around like a bad smell, as Greg would say. I was at the first AutoCon. It was one of the best live events I've been to in a while because it's small, it's tightly focused, it's not overwhelming. And that tight focus on network automation means that everybody you run into is like doing something or trying to do something, get their arms around network automation. So the learning opportunities are just everywhere. So come join us in Denver. You can find out more at networkautomation.forum/AutoCon2. That's networkautomation.forum/AutoCon2.
Okay, and moving on with the news, storage array vendor Pure Storage has announced that it's joining the Ultra Ethernet Consortium. And that Ethernet Consortium exists to promote the evolution of Ethernet standards to accommodate high-performance use cases of various sorts, including AI. And what's interesting here is that obviously InfiniBand is usually the winner here in storage, but there's this whole move, there's a lot of momentum towards moving towards Ethernet within high-performance data centers to support high-performance performance workloads. And Drew, what do you think about that, the ongoing move towards Ethernet?
Yeah, I think that the rise of AI and people trying to bring AI workloads on-prem to train models or do inference training means that they're looking at, how do I build this network fabric that I need? Of course, the switch vendors and the Ethernet silicon vendors want to get in on this because there's a lot of opportunity there. So there's this huge industry push to make Ethernet suitable as a network fabric for AI workloads. InfiniBand is essentially the default choice for AI and HPC because it's lossless, and particularly with these AI workloads, they do not tolerate loss, delay, congestion, retransmissions. So there's a lot of effort to try to make Ethernet more like a lossless network fabric, which it isn't. So that's one of the reasons the Ultra Ethernet Consortium is around.
Yeah, and I would just say never bet against Ethernet. As you may recall, of course, TCP/IP was designed, and in fact, one of the original guys who worked on the internet, Mike Odell, said many, many years ago, sending voice traffic across TCP/IP is like using a catalytic converter to hammer in tent pegs, which I thought was pretty funny as an analogy. TCP/IP, you would think, is the world's worst choice for handling synchronous traffic and traffic that needs to be that's very latency sensitive, but we made it work, and the same thing is happening with Ethernet as well. So yeah, I just add it's good to hedge your bets by supporting both standards or all standards, but never bet against Ethernet also.
I think that is, frankly, a safe bet. And also, storage networking is definitely going to have to play a part in your AI workloads because you're going to need to get that storage from somewhere. So no surprise to me that Pure Storage wants to cover its bases and get involved with UEC. All right, moving on. Chipmaker Texas Instruments is set to get $1.6 billion in direct funding from the U.S. CHIPS Act. The money will go to construction of new chip-making facilities, 2 in Texas and 1 in Utah. Texas Instruments is also going to get $6 to $8 billion investments in U.S. tax credits from the government and $10 million for workforce development. According to Reuters, TI makes chips that are used in multiple devices from smartphones to cars, and the company says the new factory should create as many as 2,000 jobs.
Yeah, and just to remind everybody, the CHIPS Act is meant to bolster U.S. production of semiconductors. Emphasis on the word production because we'll come to that in a second. By far, Intel has been the biggest beneficiary of announced grants. It has been awarded $8.5 billion in cash to date, but as we noted on a previous episode, they didn't actually get the money, which may be tied into their decision to lay off a number of workers, which we talked about a few episodes ago.
Yeah.
And interestingly, one of the questions you might be asking is, well, here's what TI compares to Intel, but what about, AMD and NVIDIA? And they've gotten nothing so far. They don't yet have fabs. And we're talking about the direct funding for fabs and the companies that have benefited directly from the CHIPS Act, including Intel, now TI. We've got Samsung, Micron, Microchip, Polar, BAE Systems, and a few other folks, but not AMD and NVIDIA, which are, of course, Intel's direct competitors. So, it would seem to me I'm not running a chip manufacturing company, but it would seem to me it might make sense to actually start producing chips if you're interested in getting any of that largesse.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. The point of the legislation is to start to fire up again domestic manufacturing and fabrication capability. So, yeah, I wonder if AMD and NVIDIA are seeing all of this money being handed out and being like, I wonder maybe we should get in on this.
I don't know if they are. I mean, there's benefit to sticking to your knitting and saying that's not us, no matter how tempting the bribes are. On the other hand, hey, it's taxpayer money. Why not take it? I would sort of lean towards the latter, as I've said, largely because I actually believe that having our fabs offshore is a national security vulnerability. We do a lot of work with those U.S. DoD agencies that cannot be named, DoD and DHS and DOJ that cannot be named, and this is a glaring vulnerability. We've always said this. Like, as soon as you start offshoring manufacturing, you invite bugs to be installed in whatever it is you're doing. So maybe don't do that. There's still the possibility if it's onshore, but it's a little bit safer at least. So, yeah. So I guess my point is manufacturing within the U.S. has got to be a strategic priority for the U.S., and therefore the companies that manufacture chips should be considering that. But if you don't manufacture chips, maybe that's not a good enough reason to get into the business of manufacturing them. versus designing them.
Right. And at the moment, NVIDIA at least is making money hand over fist.
Exactly. Like if I'm making that much money, why would I go after a measly billion or two here or there?
Right.
You know,
which means I also have to build a fab somewhere and then run it.
Oh, right. Exactly. That said, downstream, as the U.S. decides that AI is more and more mission critical to its future, which may happen, NVIDIA may see fit to regret that decision. But we're speculating. In any event, TI just got some of the goodies.
Yeah. Congratulations. All right. We're going to wrap up with Cisco. They reported their Q4 and full year earnings. Wasn't good. That's the high level takeaway here. For Q4, Cisco had revenues of $13.6 billion, down 10% year over year, with net income of $2.2 billion, down 45% over last year. For full fiscal year 2024, revenues were $53.8 billion, down 6%, with net income of $10.3 billion, down 18%. By business unit, networking revenues were $22.9 billion for the year, down 15%. Security revenue was just over $5 billion. However, it was up 32%. Collaboration was $4.1 billion, up 2%, and observability was $837 million, up 27%.
Which I think is significant both in size and trend, because if you look at the $22.9 billion, if Cisco Security were spin off as a security company, that'd still be a pretty significant security company. I'm actually surprised they got an uptick in collaboration because I am not seeing them winning in this collaboration space. But hey, they're doing well, great. And observability, I think, just ties back into everything we've talked about on this episode having to do with management, observability, and insight into what's going on in your environment. So no surprise here on the three that are up. And the real question is, in the macro sense, I think you have a thesis there, Drew.
Yeah, so my thesis is that the networking revenues have kind of been juiced over the past year or two as post-COVID pipelines opened up again and delayed orders could be filled. So Cisco results have been kind of on an artificial sugar high, and that sugar high is now over. So I think this year's results look worse, at least in networking compared to 2023. And I will note that 2023 was a record revenue year, the highest Cisco's seen in a decade. And they just couldn't sustain it in 2024 because that artificial spike has dipped. So 2024 in comparison to 2023 looks bad. But I think if you sort of smooth it out over time, 2024 is probably not as bad as it just looks like in comparison to last year.
Yeah, and of course, there's the question of, well, what's the impact of AI on all of this? And I know you have some opinions there, Drew. What do you think?
So the press releases that are coming out, both around Cisco's layoffs, it says they're laying off people and pivoting to AI. And of course, every tech company has to put out a press release talking about AI. So that's just what they do. But I guess I'm curious, like in the networking space, I feel like it's hard to say AI is going to be a source for new revenue. Maybe it's a bulwark against defections to other vendors, but I guess I just don't feel like it's going to be driving new revenue. And my case for this is Juniper. So Mist was and is a legitimately good AI ops for WLANs, but I feel like it barely moved the needle for Juniper in terms of revenue and market share. So it did put Juniper back on the map on the campus in a way that it hadn't been for a long time, but it also wasn't kind of like the hockey stick growth that Juniper was expecting. And they still ended up at acquisition target despite having, you could argue one of the best AI networking products in the game. So with Cisco saying we're pivoting to AI, do we really think AI is going to be a new revenue generator or just sort of a feature you have to have and not really accretive to actual driving new revenue?
Well, I would tease that out a little bit, Drew, because I agree with you about AI as a feature. It's a capability. It's actually a tool for delivering a capability even more than it is a feature or tool.
Yeah.
Because at some level, you shouldn't care how something gets done. It's simply that it gets done.
Yes.
But that said, if you look at Cisco's own results, AI is key to making observability really work. And observability was, in fact, up now from a very small base. And there's also the bigger picture that management broadly is almost never a huge revenue generator, even if your entire company is based on making something manageable, because weirdly enough, people want to pay for the hardware and software, but they don't want to pay for the management. And that's just a quirk of human nature. But all that said, I would say the way to look at AI is as a tool to get something done, which is why I liked it in the Morpheus acquisition. Generative AI is a tool in the Morpheus toolkit. It is one of several. They use whichever one makes the most sense. And that's really how people should be thinking of acquiring AI in their products, whether Cisco, Juniper, HPE, or other.
Yeah, I take that point. I think Cisco, if it's going to be successful with AI, it's got a lot of barriers, a sprawling portfolio, multiple product and OS platforms in the same categories, lots of siloed products, which means lots of siloed data stores. So I do think it has a ton of work to do to sort of be believable in AI. But I think they also see where the market is going and are probably putting investments in that direction.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they are good that way.
Yeah. All right. That wraps up the news. John, if folks want to get more from you, where should they go?
Please hit us up at nemrdes.com. That's N as in Nancy, E-M as in Mary, E-R-T as in Thomas, E-S as in Sam, nemrdes.com. Love to hear from you.
All right. I'm Drew Conry Murray. I blog at packetpushers.net, and you can find me on LinkedIn. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Network Break. If you like the show, leave a recommendation on Apple Podcasts or share a link with a friend. And you can always send us comments, corrections, or kudos. That's at packetpushers.net/FU. The FU is for follow-up. We take all follow-up seriously, so please do reach out. As always, thanks for listening.